Tears streamed down her face as she forced a dry, dressing-free piece of lettuce down her throat, her toxic ex laughing openly from the next table. Suddenly, the city's most ruthless crime boss shattered her porcelain bowl against the wall, pulled her thick curves against his chest and whispered, "I like you exactly like this." Clara Miller stared at the sad, wilting bowl of arugula sitting in front of her. It was Tuesday at 1 p.m., and she was on her lunch break at Bistro Vendôme, a quiet, upscale spot in the heart of the Chicago financial district. Her stomach let out a low, agonizing rumble. It was begging for the creamy truffle linguine the couple at the adjacent table was happily sharing, but Clara firmly pressed her palms against her stomach and forced herself to log 2 cups mixed greens, 0 dressing, into her MyFitnessPal app. She had to be thin. She had to fix herself. Jason's voice, a cruel ghost that had haunted her for the last 6 agonizing months, echoed persistently in the back of her mind. "You have a pretty face, Clara, but I can't be seen at high-profile corporate events with someone who looks like this. It's a reflection on my brand. It's embarrassing." Jason Parker was a junior partner at a prestigious downtown law firm, a man who wore custom Armani suits, drove a silver Audi, and possessed the moral compass of a cornered viper. When they first met 3 years ago, Clara had been utterly comfortable in her size 18 body. She was soft, unapologetically curvy, and possessed a vibrant, infectious laugh. But 3 years with Jason had systematically chipped away at her soul. It never started with shouting. It started with insidious, small comments. He would gently suggest she skip dessert for her health. He would buy her beautiful, expensive designer dresses that were deliberately 2 sizes too small, framing them as motivation. It eventually culminated in a brutal public breakup at his firm's winter gala. He had abandoned her standing alone by the ice sculpture, awkwardly pulling at her shapewear, while he slipped out the side door with a size 2 paralegal named Tiffany. Since that devastating night, Clara had been violently punishing herself. She threw out all her favorite foods, the artisan cheeses, the dark chocolates, the fresh sourdough. She spent grueling, mind-numbing hours on the elliptical at the gym until her shins splintered and her lungs burned. She starved herself on a strictly monitored, highly restrictive 800-calorie-a-day regimen. She was losing weight, yes, but she was also losing her hair, her boundless energy, and her spark. Her normally glowing, sun-kissed complexion was now sallow and grey. The beautiful tailored, plus-size vintage dresses she used to rock with absolute confidence now hung awkwardly on her shrinking yet still heavily scrutinized frame. Her best friend Samantha had begged her to stop warning her that she was disappearing before her very eyes, but Clara was deaf to reason. She just wanted the pain of Jason's rejection to stop. Well, if it isn't Clara, still trying to chew your way through the rabbit food, I see. Clara froze, her breath caught in her throat. The silver fork slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the ceramic bowl. She didn't even need to look up to recognize that smug, nasal baritone. Jason stood directly beside her small corner table, a condescending smirk plastered across his perfectly tanned face. Clinging desperately to his arm was Tiffany, looking like she had just stepped off a Paris runway in a skin-tight emerald green cocktail dress that left nothing to the imagination. "Jason," Clara whispered, her throat instantly bone dry. She instinctively crossed her arms over her stomach, hunching her shoulders in a desperate attempt to make herself look physically smaller. "I'm genuinely surprised they let you in here." Jason scoffed, his eyes raking over her form with undisguised performative disgust. "I see you're still struggling with basic portion control. Honestly, Clara, You'd think after I finally dumped you, you'd find a shred of discipline. A pathetic little salad isn't going to magically fix years of letting yourself go. Tiffany let out a high-pitched, grating giggle, leaning her weight into Jason's side. Oh my God, is this the famous ex you told me about, babe? The one who broke the suspension on your car when she sat in the passenger seat. The humiliation hit Clara like a physical heavy blow to the chest. Hot tears immediately pricked the corners of her eyes, blurring the bustling restaurant around her. Bistro Vendôme had gone uncomfortably quiet, and Clara could feel the pitying, whispered stares of the other wealthy patrons burning into her skin. She wanted the polished hardwood floor to open up and swallow her whole. She looked down at her miserable dry salad, a symbol of her agonizing daily effort, and felt completely, utterly worthless. "Just leave me alone, Jason." She managed to choke out her voice, breaking barely registering above a desperate whisper. "Please. I'm just giving you some constructive criticism, Clara. You should be thanking me." Jason mocked, leaning closer, intentionally invading her personal space to intimidate her. "You're pathetic. You're fat. You're lazy. And no respectable man is ever going to look at you and see anything other than a massive liability." Clara squeezed her eyes shut. A single tear finally escaped, tracing a hot, humiliating path down her pale cheek. Her mind broke under the weight of his cruelty. She reached for a piece of dry lettuce with her fork, a desperate, broken, subconscious attempt to physically show him she was trying to prove to her abuser that she was dieting. She raised the shaking fork toward her lips. Before the silver prongs could even brush her lips, a large, impossibly strong hand clamped over her wrist like a steel vice. The grip was scorching hot, entirely unyielding, and radiated a quiet, terrifying authority that made the hairs on the back of Clara's neck stand at attention. Clara gasped, her eyes flying open in shock. Standing rigidly beside her chair was Gabriel Rossi. He was a man who commanded a room simply by drawing breath in it. 6'4" of pure lethal muscle, wrapped in a bespoke three-piece charcoal suit that probably cost more than Clara's yearly salary. His jawline looked sharp enough to cut diamonds, and his dark, piercing obsidian eyes held a swirling storm of calculated murderous violence. Officially in the eyes of the IRS and the public, Gabriel Rossi was the billionaire CEO of Rossi Logistics. Unofficially to the terrified whispers in the city's dark, blood-soaked underbelly, he was the unquestioned head of the Rossi crime syndicate. He was ruthless, politically untouchable, and a man who destroyed generational empires before his morning espresso. He was also Clara's employer. Clara worked strictly on the top floor as a senior financial analyst for his legitimate front company. She knew Gabriel only in passing, having handed him quarterly expenditure reports in terrified, absolute silence during board meetings. She had absolutely no idea he even knew her name, let alone why he was currently standing at her table in a crowded bistro, his grip firm but surprisingly gentle on her wrist. Standing 10 feet behind him, blocking the main exit of the restaurant, was Matteo Gabriel's heavily tattooed right-hand man, his arms crossed and his suit jacket noticeably bulging near the shoulder holster. "What are you doing, Clara?" Gabriel's voice was a low, dark rumble that vibrated right through the floorboards into her bones. It held a highly dangerous edge that made the air in the room suddenly feel very thin and inadequate. "Mr. Rossi," Clara stammered, paralyzed by a chaotic mixture of profound confusion and fear. I'm just trying to eat my lunch." Gabriel slowly turned his dead gaze from Clara's terrified face down to the bowl of dry, pathetic arugula. His upper lip curled in profound, visceral distaste. Without uttering a single word, he calmly reached out and took the ceramic bowl with his free hand. With a casual, terrifyingly fluid flick of his massive wrist, he hurled the bowl across the room. It shattered against the far exposed brick wall with a violent explosive crash. Shards of expensive porcelain and wilted green leaves rained down onto the floor. The entire restaurant went dead silent. Waiters froze mid-step with trays of champagne. Wealthy patrons stopped chewing their filet mignons. The sheer violence of the act was deafening. "Hey, what the hell is your problem, buddy?" Jason barked, though he instinctively took a nervous step backward, pushing Tiffany slightly in front of him like a human shield. He clearly didn't recognize Gabriel, thoroughly blinded by his own towering arrogance. "You can't just come in here and throw things like some kind of unhinged animal. I'll call the cops." Gabriel didn't even dignify Jason with a glance. His dark, consuming eyes remained entirely focused on Clara. He smoothly released her wrist and stepped closer to her chair, his massive frame effectively shielding her trembling body from the rest of the room and from Jason. "Why are you starving yourself?" Gabriel demanded, his tone dropping an octave, slipping seamlessly from a cold professional register into something intensely, dangerously intimate. I need to—" Clara whispered, the dam breaking as fresh tears spilled over her lashes. "I'm trying to diet. I'm too big. I'm a liability. Stop." Gabriel cut her off, his voice absolute law. He reached out his rough, calloused thumb, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. The jarring contrast between his violent outburst a second ago and this extreme, delicate tenderness made Clara's breath hitch in her throat. "You are not too big. You are perfect. I have spent the last 8 months watching you shrink away, watching the brilliant light die in your eyes, and I am officially done standing by in the shadows while you destroy yourself for a worthless ghost." Clara stared up at him, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs like a trapped bird. 8 months. He's been watching me for 8 months. Gabriel finally turned his head, fixing his chilling, dead-eyed gaze on Jason. The temperature in the bistro seemed to plummet 20 degrees. Mateo cracked his knuckles by the door, a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "Jason Parker," Gabriel said, slowly tasting the syllables of the name like foul poison on his tongue. Junior partner at a mediocre downtown firm, currently drowning in a mountain of severe gambling debts from illicit high-stakes poker games run by the triads in the South Side. Jason's smug expression vanished in a millisecond, all the color draining from his perfectly tanned face until he looked like a corpse. Who are you? How do you know about that?" "I am the man who just bought the markers on that debt 30 minutes ago," Gabriel stated coldly. He stepped away from Clara, advancing on Jason with the slow, terrifying, predatory grace of a hungry panther. "And I am the man who is going to ruin your miserable life. Not just financially, Parker. I am going to erase you from the face of this earth." "Oh my God, you're Gabriel Rossi!" Tiffany gasped, her heavily lashed eyes wide with sudden stark terror as she finally recognized the face from the city's warning whispers. She dropped Jason's arm as if he had caught fire and scrambled frantically backward, wanting absolutely no part of this impending execution. Gabriel stopped mere inches from Jason, towering over the trembling lawyer. "You look at a queen, and you see a liability because you possess the pathetic soul of a peasant," Gabriel sneered, his voice carrying easily through the silent restaurant. "You mentally tortured her. You made her hate the soft, beautiful body that I have spent nearly a year obsessing over." Clara gasped loudly, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Obsessing over Gabriel reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slapped it brutally hard against Jason's chest, the impact making the smaller man flinch violently. "Those are the foreclosure deeds to your luxury condo, the repossession title to your Audi, and the photographic blackmail material on your senior partners that you thought was safely hidden in your office safe. I own you, Parker. I own your past, your present, and your future." Gabriel leaned in, his voice dropping to a demonic whisper that only Jason and Clara could hear. "And if you ever breathe the same air as Clara again, if you ever so much as let your pathetic eyes wander in her direction, I will have Mateo scatter your pieces across the muddy bottom of the Chicago River. Do we have a crystal-clear understanding?" Jason was shaking so violently his teeth were practically chattering. He couldn't form words. He only nodded frantically, his eyes wide with sheer terror as he clutched the envelope to his chest like a useless shield. "Get out of my sight," Gabriel ordered quietly. Jason turned and practically sprinted out of the restaurant, completely abandoning Tiffany, who awkwardly and frantically scurried out behind him seconds later, her heels clicking desperately against the wood. Gabriel stood still for a moment, taking a deep, steadying breath. He rolled his broad shoulders, seemingly shedding the aura of extreme violence like an old coat. When he turned back to Clara, the cold, murderous look in his eyes completely melted away, replaced by a burning, protective warmth. He extended a large, scarred hand toward her. "Come with me, Mia Bella," he said softly, the Italian endearment slipping out naturally. Clara looked at his hand, her mind spinning entirely out of control. The terrifying head of a mafia family, a billionaire who could ruin lives with a single phone call, had just bought her ex's massive debt, solely to destroy him, all because he was secretly obsessed with her. Her a size 18 accountant, who couldn't even stick to a diet without crying. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, though she tentatively, instinctively placed her small, shaking hand into his massive one. Gabriel's strong fingers immediately closed around hers, warm, grounding, and infinitely secure. He gently pulled her up from the bistro chair and immediately tucked her tightly against his side. His arm wrapped possessively around her waist, pulling her thick, soft curves flush against his hard, muscular body. He didn't care who was watching. He wanted the world to know she was his. "I am taking you to get real food," Gabriel said decisively, guiding her toward the exit as Mateo and the rest of his security detail materialized from the shadows to form a protective wall around them. "You are done shrinking to fit into a world that doesn't deserve you, Clara. From now on, you take up all the space you want. I like you exactly like this." Outside the suffocating atmosphere of the bistro, the brisk Chicago air hit Clara like a physical wave, but she barely felt the cold. Gabriel's large, cashmere-clad arm remained an impenetrable fortress around her waist, shielding her from the biting wind as he guided her toward a sleek, black, bulletproof Maybach, idling illegally on the curb. Mateo opened the rear door, scanning the busy financial district with hawkish intensity, while Gabriel gently handed Clara into the plush leather interior. "Where are we going?" she asked. Again, her voice still trembling, as Gabriel slid into the seat beside her, the heavy door clicking shut with a vault-like finality. "To Monteverde in the West Loop," Gabriel answered, naming one of the most exclusive, impossible-to-book Italian restaurants in the city. "I had Mateo clear out the main dining room 20 minutes ago. It belongs entirely to us for the afternoon." Clara's eyes widened. "Gabriel, you can't just rent out an entire restaurant at 1 in the afternoon." "I own the building, Clara. I can do whatever I please," he stated simply, unbuttoning his suit jacket and turning his massive frame to face her. His dark eyes softened, tracing the hollows of her cheeks that hadn't been there a year ago. "But right now, the only thing that pleases me is making sure you actually eat something that doesn't taste like punishment." 20 minutes later, Clara found herself seated at a private, candlelit table in the center of the beautiful rustic restaurant. The kitchen doors swung open, and a parade of chefs brought out a breathtaking feast. There were steaming plates of handmade burrata tortellini, bathed in rich truffle butter, a massive center-cut Florentine steak, roasted garlic focaccia, glistening with extra virgin olive oil, and a decadent, dark chocolate espresso tiramisu. The intoxicating aroma hit Clara's starved senses like a physical blow. Her stomach cramped with violent hunger, yet the psychological conditioning of the past 6 months screamed at her. Too many carbs, too much fat. Jason will be disgusted. She stared at the plate of tortellini placed in front of her, her hands shaking in her lap. The crushing guilt was paralyzing. Gabriel noticed the hesitation instantly. He didn't mock her, nor did he push the plate closer. Instead, he pulled his chair around the table until he was sitting flush against her side. He picked up a silver fork, pierced a soft, cheese-filled tortellini, and dipped it into the rich truffle sauce. "Look at me, Clara," he commanded softly. She turned her head, her eyes wide and glassy with unshed tears. "Jason Parker is a dead man walking. His opinions do not exist in my world, and they no longer exist in yours." Gabriel murmured, his voice a dark, soothing velvet. "You are not a project to be fixed. Your softness, your curves, your absolute radiance, they are a privilege to witness. Open your mouth, Mia Bella." Hesitantly, her lips parted. Gabriel fed her the tortellini. The explosion of rich cheese, warm pasta, and earthy truffle on her tongue was so overwhelming that a sob actually tore from Clara's throat. It was the first time she had tasted real food, felt real warmth in over half a year. Gabriel calmly set the fork down and pulled her into his chest, letting her cry into his expensive suit as she chewed. He stroked her thinning hair, his large hand rubbing soothing circles on her back. "I saw you for the first time 14 months ago," Gabriel confessed quietly into her hair, revealing the truth that had set this entire chaotic day into motion. "You were sitting outside the Intelligentsia coffee on Monadnock. You were wearing a yellow sundress that hugged every single beautiful curve of your body, and you were eating a chocolate croissant. You threw your head back and laughed at something your friend said, and I swear to God, Clara, the entire street lit up." Clara pulled back slightly, looking up at his sharp, sculpted jaw in disbelief. You remember what I was wearing?" "I remember everything," Gabriel said fiercely. "I had my men find out who you were. When I learned you worked for a mid-level accounting firm, I bought the majority shares of that firm. I integrated it into Rossi Logistics, just so you would be in my building. I spent months admiring you from afar, planning how to introduce myself without terrifying you with my other business ventures. And then I watched that parasitic lawyer drain the absolute life out of you." His jaw clenched tightly, a flicker of raw, unrestrained violence returning to his obsidian eyes. "I watched your clothes get looser. I saw the dark circles under your eyes. I wanted to put a bullet between his eyes months ago, but I knew you still loved him. I had to wait until he broke the bond. Today, when I saw him corner you in that bistro, my patience officially evaporated. You bought a company just to be near me." Clara whispered, her mind struggling to process the sheer, terrifying magnitude of his devotion. "I would buy the entire city of Chicago and burn it to the ground if it meant keeping you safe," Gabriel replied, his tone devoid of any exaggeration. He picked up the fork again. "Now, eat your pasta, my queen. We have an empire to run, and you need your strength." 3 weeks later, the remnants of Clara's old painful life had been entirely systematically erased by the Rossi syndicate. Jason had completely vanished from the city. Rumor had it he was working as a fry cook in a miserable diner in Nebraska, his law license permanently revoked after an anonymous tip led the state bar directly to a mountain of embezzled client funds. Tiffany had miraculously transferred to a firm in Seattle, terrified of the shadows in Chicago. Clara, however, was blooming. Under Gabriel's fiercely protective, endlessly patient care, her vibrant spark had returned. She had moved into his sprawling, high-security penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. They spent their evenings cooking massive, decadent Italian meals together, Gabriel worshipping every single inch of her recovering soft body, proving to her night after night that her size 18 figure was his ultimate obsession. Yet the final test of her recovered confidence arrived on a Friday night, the annual Chicago Syndicated Commerce Gala, the exact same high-profile corporate event where Jason had brutally abandoned her the year before. Clara stood frozen in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling mirror in Gabriel's master bedroom. She was terrified. High society was notoriously cruel to bodies like hers. Gabriel walked up behind her, dressed in a lethal, perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He wrapped his arms around her thick waist, resting his chin on her bare shoulder. "You look breathtaking," he murmured, kissing the crook of her neck. He wasn't lying. Refusing to let her wear the restrictive, painful garments of her past, Gabriel had secretly flown in a master tailor from Milan, a designer famous for celebrating voluptuous silhouettes. Clara was wearing a custom deep ruby-red silk gown that draped flawlessly over her hips, accentuated her ample cleavage, and hugged her thick thighs with unapologetic drama. Her skin was glowing, her hair was styled in lush old Hollywood waves, and a diamond necklace worth more than a private jet rested heavily against her collarbone. "Are you sure?" Clara whispered, gripping his hands. "The people at this gala, they're ruthless. They look at women like me and they whisper." Gabriel spun her around his hands, gripping her waist firmly. "Let them whisper. They whisper because they are terrified. Tonight you do not walk into that room as an accountant, and you do not walk in as an apology. You walk into that room as Clara Rossi, my fiancée, the untouchable queen of the most powerful syndicate in the Midwest." He reached into his pocket and produced a velvet box, snapping it open to reveal a massive, flawless 10-carat, blood ruby engagement ring framed by crushed diamonds. Clara gasped, tears instantly springing to her eyes. "Gabriel, I have loved you since the moment I saw you laughing with pastry flakes on your lips," Gabriel said, sliding the heavy cold ring onto her trembling finger. "Marry me, Clara. Let me spend the rest of my life feeding you, protecting you, and worshipping the body that belongs entirely on a throne." Clara threw her arms around his neck, pulling his lips down to hers for a searing, passionate kiss that tasted of absolute devotion and unapologetic power. "Yes," she breathed against his mouth. "Yes, I will." An hour later, the massive double doors of the Drake Hotel's grand ballroom swung open. The idle chatter of the city's corrupt billionaires, corrupt politicians, and hidden mob bosses died instantly. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the entrance. There stood Gabriel Rossi, the undisputed ruthless king of Chicago's underbelly, and clinging proudly to his arm, radiating confidence, beauty, and absolute unchecked power in her size 18 ruby gown, was Clara. She caught the eye of a few thin elitist socialites who had mocked her the year prior. Instead of shrinking, instead of hiding her stomach or lowering her head, Clara stood tall. She offered them a slow, predatory smile. Gabriel squeezed her waist, leaning in to press a kiss to her temple in front of the entire, terrified, awe-struck room. She wasn't on a diet anymore. She was exactly who she was meant to be, and she was hungry for everything the world had to offer. Did Gabriel's fierce protection and Clara's empowering journey to self-love give you chills? We want to hear your thoughts on this mafia romance twist. Hit that like button if you believe everybody deserves someone who treats them like royalty. Share this story with your friends who love a good revenge plot, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, dramatic, and intensely romantic, real-life inspired stories delivered right to your feed.